About 3 years ago in late November, my husband and I had a creepy experience that still makes us uneasy. At the time, we were living in Seattle and often spent weekends surfing. Our favorite spots were Nia Bay or Westport, which meant long drives but great waves. On this weekend, however, the surf forecast wasn't good. Rough waves and stormy conditions along the coast. We were disappointed, but started looking for other options, hoping to find a place that was a bit safer to surf. We decided to try some spots along the Strait of Juan Duca. Instead, the land along the strait is beautiful but very remote. The only way to reach it is by driving along Highway 112, which goes from Port Angeles to Nia Bay. There's almost no cell service along most of Highway 112, and there are only a few small towns along the way. We decided to try surfing at a spot along the strait called Twin. It was a place we knew well, having surfed there before, and we felt good with the area. The surf report showed the best waves would come early in the morning, so we figured it would be smart to drive out the night before and sleep in our car to be ready at dawn. Since it was late November, the weather was cold and we didn't want to spend extra money on a campsite nearby. Instead, we planned to park our car along the beach at Twin, hoping for a quiet, peaceful night by the water. We guessed there would be no one else there, and we were right. We arrived around 3:30 p.m. and the only other people parked nearby were a young couple in their camper van. Nothing unusual happened between when we arrived and around 7 p.m. We parked, then cooked some dinner, and I took a short walk along the beach. The only other thing that happened was just before sunset we heard a loud whistling sound and then noticed a man walking down the entrance road towards the beach. He had been walking along the highway, which was odd since there's nothing nearby. The highway is mostly empty with no places to stop or walk to, and it's not a path people usually take. My husband and I found it really strange and a bit unsettling. As he walked along the beach, he said hello to the young couple and they invited him to sit by their campfire for a while. The last time we saw them that night was when my husband and I decided to go to sleep around 8 p.m. About an hour later, I woke up and opened the car door a little to get some fresh air. I noticed that the young couple's camper van was gone, and for some reason it made me feel a bit uneasy. It was strange because we had seen them just a short time earlier sitting by their campfire. I couldn't really explain why I felt that way, so I figured it was just because I was tired and tried to relax. I lay back down, but when I woke up again it was nearly 11 p.m. This time I sat up so quickly that I startled my husband, and he woke up too. He asked what was wrong, and I told him nothing, just that I woke up suddenly. He seemed calm and went back to sleep, but I stayed awake for about 15 minutes trying to listen for any sound. Looking back, I think my gut feeling was telling me something wasn't right. Since I didn't hear anything, I lay back down and focused on trying to sleep. About 20 minutes later, I woke up again and saw that my husband was already awake. He was sitting very still, just listening to something outside. His silence and stillness made me feel uneasy, so I turned on the car lights and asked him what was going on. He whispered someone was tapping on the windows. I remember feeling a deep sense of fear in that moment. A few hours later, when I woke up again, I noticed that the young couple in the camper van was gone. There's no one else camping here, I said. We quickly put on our shoes, grabbed flashlights and pepper spray, then opened the car doors. Everything was silent, completely dark. My husband walked towards the trees behind us to check, while I stayed by the car, shining my flashlight down onto the beach. I didn't see anyone, so I sat on the back bumper while he kept looking around. About 2 minutes later my husband came back walking quickly. "We need to leave, there's a car parked by the exit road. It's just sitting there with the lights off and the engine running." In less than a minute we threw everything from the front seats into the back where we'd been sleeping, started the car and drove back up toward the entrance road. We drove out of there as fast as we could, but in the rush my husband got disoriented and turned the wrong way, heading down the highway toward Nia Bay. As we drove the wrong way we passed the exit road, and to our horror there was the car again, now with its headlights on. It felt like time slowed down as we both noticed it was speeding up behind us, getting closer. I could feel the tension building as we realized we weren't just imagining things, someone was really following us. The highway was narrow with forest on one side and the ocean on the other. Luckily we saw a small turnout ahead, and then quickly turning the car left as soon as we made the sharp left turn. The car following us just kept going down the highway in the same direction, not slowing down. We sped up, going about 90 miles per hour, trying to get back to Port Angeles as fast as possible. The entire drive back was tense, but no one followed us the rest of the way. The feeling of being watched and chased stayed with me. I still feel deeply creeped out when I think about the person or people in that car and what their intentions. This story takes place many years ago when I was camping alone out in California. I haven't gone camping in many years now, but when I was younger I would go on many weekend camping trips to get out in nature by myself and relax. I did these camping trips quite frequently, almost every other weekend. It felt like I loved being out in nature, but did not like the discomfort of sleeping on the ground in a tent. For how often I went camping, it made sense for me to buy a small little camper that would attach and part of the bed of my truck. It was really nice and could comfortably fit me, and even one more if I needed. One of my weekend trips I drove about 5 hours away from my house to a beautiful area that I hadn't been to before. I spent the day doing a long hike and then cooling off in a peaceful lake during the evening. By night time I had parked my truck in a quiet remote area sort of up a mountain so that I could have a nice view. When I woke up in the morning I was still up reading a book by flashlight when I heard footsteps outside and someone approaching the truck. Normally I don't ever have people walking anywhere near my truck, so it was odd to hear. For sure maybe I had parked in a bad spot or somewhere I wasn't allowed to be, and somebody was coming to let me know. Either way I didn't feel comfortable, especially since it was after dark at this point. I called out a greeting of "Hello, who's there?" As the footsteps approached closer, a raspy male voice responded, saying, "Hi there, I just wanted to check out your camper, pretty nifty." I was really quite comfortable laying in my bed in the camper in the back of the truck, so I yelled out that I could show them the camper in the morning, assuming they were maybe camping nearby. There was no response from the man outside for what felt like a couple of minutes. Finally I heard him muttering to himself, but couldn't make out anything of what he was saying. Assuming that was that, I went back to reading. Oddly though, I didn't hear any footsteps retreating away. The man had to still be standing there. He was, and after a few moments I heard footsteps moving around my truck, but still not leaving. There was tiny little porthole-like windows on the side of my camper, which I kept covered with curtains at night. I looked outside, but couldn't see the man at all, and it sounded like he had walked to the front of my truck. Next thing I know, I heard some quiet thumps starting from the hood of my truck and eventually getting closer to me. Whoever this person was had the audacity to climb onto my truck and crawl onto the roof of my truck towards the camper. In the bed of it I was a person who took very good care of my truck, and this guy was pissing me off to say the least. I shouted out, alerting the person that I had a firearm with me, and if they didn't get off my truck and leave I was going to come out with my gun. I heard the man get off of my truck and walk away a bit, but I still didn't hear their footsteps fade away as they would have if they had completely left. I got out of my camper with the firearm and my flashlight. Upon pointing the flashlight around, I saw the man crouching down near a bush about 40 feet away. As the flashlight illuminated him, he backed away farther into the darkness. I had had enough with whoever this person was at this point. I didn't know if it was somebody who had gone on drugs or somebody crazier, but I shouted to him to leave and not come back. I was already up at this point and was driving back home in the morning anyways, so I packed my stuff up and headed home early. Whether it be due to scary encounters such as I had with a person or something animal related, I've always had my firearm with me when I went camping, and I'm thankful that I had it on me that night. A few months ago, I went hiking at a state forest that I visit often. I've been there so many times and nothing unusual ever occurred before. The forest covers nearly 2,000 acres with long winding trails that stretch through thick wild trees. There are two parking lots, one on the east side and the other on the west, but they are quite far from each other now. That day I went to the eastern parking lot, and I was happy to see that I was the only person there and my car was the only one in the lot. This isn't strange because the forest is very quiet and hidden, so not many people come. That's one of the reasons I enjoy going there. I usually like to leave the main trail and explore the woods, finding spots that look untouched or places that are really far from anything made by people. That day felt like any other. I set off with my dog on a familiar trail, enjoying the quiet. We walked about 6 miles into the woods until we came to a spot where the riverbed crossed the trail. The sound of the flowing water caught my attention, and I decided to leave the trail and follow the river deeper into the forest. The trees were thick and the air felt cool. As we moved further in away from any sign of the trail, we kept walking along the riverbed, going about 3 more miles surrounded by nothing but nature. As I was walking, I heard what sounded like a very distant conversation between two people. I stopped and listened, and everything around me was silent, but I could still hear the faint sound of two people talking. It was so quiet that I thought it might be an animal. Then I figured there was no reason for people to be out there, which seemed really unlikely. The sound slowly faded away, so I ignored it and continued walking. The riverbed was in a deep valley with steep hills rising on both sides. I decided to climb the hill on the right side to get a better view of the area, and then turn around, which would make my total hike about 16 miles. My dog followed as I started the climb, and it was tough. The hill was steep and I was getting more and more tired as I went up. After what felt like a long time, I finally reached a flat area at the top, and there I spotted a large rock, sat down to catch my breath, and let my dog rest as well. I was sitting there in complete silence with my dog when out of nowhere I suddenly heard two people talking, but I couldn't understand a single word. The voices were coming from just around the bend, near the cliff next to me. This terrified me because I was there to get as far away from people as possible. Now keep in mind that I had arrived at a secluded state forest with an empty parking lot and no other cars. You need a car to get there, and I didn't know of any other way to reach that spot. I had walked deep into the woods far off the trail and climbed a very steep hill to a high point when this happened. Also, it was the start of spring and the ground was covered with at least a foot of dead leaves and twigs. My movements through the woods would have sounded very loud like a freight train, so they should have heard me coming and I would have heard any other sounds, but I didn't hear anything. The voices started and then went silent within about a minute. By then I was really scared and decided to leave as quickly as possible, but that's not where it ends. When I finally reached the riverbed again and made my way back toward the trail I had left behind, I suddenly heard the two voices again, and this time they were making strange wolf-like cries that echoed through the trees behind me. They kept crying and howling over and over for a long time, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Even when I finally got back on the trail, I could still hear those unsettling sounds in the distance. Finally, I reached my car with my dog and we quickly left the area. There were still no other cars in the parking lot or anywhere around, so it seems very unlikely for two people to be where I was given the situation, though I'm not saying it's impossible now. It could have been some really experienced outdoorsman who had been roaming the woods for a while, but still, why were they howling? Why didn't they make any other noise? And why didn't they seem to notice me coming, which they definitely would have heard? I was backpacking through a route I'd found in the Cascades National Park. It was an out and back trail that typically takes 3 days one way and 3 days back. I didn't know too much about it or how popular of a trail it was, but when doing these long backpacking routes it usually doesn't matter, because you'll most likely not run into many people anyway. On my third day out, though, I passed by one of the campsites and saw a man sitting by his tent. I took a break and we talked for a bit, where he mentioned he was staying there for the night and heading to the peak of the trail on the following day. I told him that that's where I was heading today and that I'll probably see him when he gets there. I left shortly after and got to what would be my campsite for the next 2 nights. The view was something I'd never experienced before and made for a great rest day and peak of the trail. For that whole day nobody passed through, and when it came to night I was still the only one camping there. I thought back to that guy I'd met at the campsite a day behind me who said he'd be reaching this trail peak on this day. He never showed up, though. I thought he maybe decided to turn around for some reason or just camp out for another day at the place he was already at. In the morning I packed up and started back down the way I came, though I got a late start, so at the very least I was hoping to make it to that same campsite the man was at. I was really sore for some reason too, which didn't help, and before I knew it there was almost no daylight left. I put on my headlamp and continued on the trail, walking for another hour past sundown before I made it to the camp. The tent that the man had was still there, set up like he never left. Knowing his plans to continue hiking, and just knowing that staying at one camp for several days while backpacking is unusual, I called out asking if he was okay. There was no response. I walked up a bit closer and said I just wanted to check in on him, but the flap on his tent was partially open and nobody was inside. I felt a lump in my throat, like my body knew something wasn't right. I stood and looked all around, not seeing a single sign of him anywhere, until I saw a glimmer in the distance. There was a faint light sitting still far out in the woods. I began walking up to it, going about 40 yards from the tents. Before I found the source, it was a headlamp laying on the ground like it had been accidentally left behind, and the light was so dim that it must have been nearly out of batteries. And it was just then that I noticed someone watching me. They were standing not too far, just 10 yards away, and clearly trying to not be seen. I knew in my gut that this wasn't the man from before, but I felt like I had to say or do something. "Hello, do you need help?" They stood still and quiet. "I'm sorry, I'll leave," I said shakily, then hurried back to the tent. Luckily, I hadn't unpacked anything yet, so I put my backpack on and started walking out of the campsite. As I did that, headlamp in the woods turned off. I got away and walked as far as I could, going another 3 miles to the next camp. I reported it as soon as I could as well, and unfortunately it was just what I thought it was. The man that I had met was missing. There is almost no traces for them to follow, and out in the back country it's nearly impossible to search for anyone. Who that person I saw out there was is likely the biggest unknown that could give us answers as to what happened, though it seems like most of us are aware of the most probable scenario that took